Madison had been dancing since she was 4, but I think it was in that crowded, fluorescent-lit dressing room, on the morning of the biggest performance of her life, that she truly became an artist. Not because of the routine she was about to perform, or the stage waiting behind the velvet curtain, but because of the way she stood there, perfectly still. Her eyes fixed on the 6-inch rip that ran down the side of her competition dress. A tear too precise to be an accident. A silence too sharp to be innocent. And Heather, my sister-in-law, stood behind her, one hand over her mouth in mock horror, the other still clutching the bracelet she claimed had snagged the zipper. It had taken me less than 3 minutes. I had stepped out to get the hairspray from the car. The garment bag had been hung carefully, the teal fabric untouched, the rhinestones catching light like they were meant to. When I walked back in, the damage had already been done. I heard the sound first, the distinct rip of delicate fabric giving way, and then the gasps. Crystals scattered across the tile. Madison frozen. Heather already in character. "Oh no," she said, loud enough for the other parents to hear. "My bracelet must have caught when I was helping with the zipper. I'm just so clumsy sometimes." And then, as if she couldn't help herself, she leaned in toward Madison and whispered something only we could hear. "Now my girls will win for sure." Her smirk was soft, almost casual. It didn't match the devastation in my daughter's eyes. That was the moment I knew it hadn't just been an accident. Not this time, and probably not the last. There had been others, the missing shoes, the mistimed competition address, the spilled coffee. And I had let each one pass, telling myself not to stir up family tension. For the kids, for Kevin, for peace. But this wasn't about peace. It was about erasure. About undermining a 12-year-old's years of work with a single calculated motion. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I walked over and picked up the scattered crystals, brushing them gently into my palm. Then I turned to Madison. "Let's get some air," I said, because I knew if we stayed in that room a second longer, it would not be for breathing. She followed without a word. Her face was pale, and her lips were pressed together like she was holding back more than just tears. I rested my hand on her back as we stepped into the hallway, the noise of the other dancers muffling behind us. My heart ached, not just for the dress or the ruined routine, but for the quiet look on her face. She wasn't confused. She wasn't surprised. She had expected this, and that broke something inside me. I should have known. I should have seen it coming. But I hadn't. Because I'd been too focused on being polite, on keeping the peace, on trusting that Heather, whatever her flaws, wouldn't cross that line. But lines don't matter to people who are always drawing new ones. We sat on a bench outside the dressing area, near a row of lockers where the foot traffic had thinned. Madison didn't speak. She rested her hands on her lap, fingers lightly tracing the air as if rehearsing choreography only she could see. Her composure wasn't the forced kind children wear to please their parents. It was something older, more guarded. And it unsettled me. I had always told myself that by avoiding conflict with Heather, I was shielding Madison from stress. That if I smiled through the jabs, if I let the comments roll off, Madison wouldn't absorb any of it. But that morning, I realized my daughter had seen everything. She had been watching the way I swallowed hurt, how I excused Heather's jealousy, how I left openings wide enough for sabotage to walk through. "Do you want to call Sophia?" I asked, breaking the silence. Her teacher would know what to do, what adjustments could be made, whether a borrowed costume would be enough, how much the judges would penalize for appearance. Madison shook her head. "She's with the juniors. I don't want to interrupt." It was the answer of someone who'd already made a decision, even if I couldn't see it yet. I checked the time. 90 minutes. That was all we had. There was no way to repair the dress. Too much damage, too little time. Even if we stitched it together with safety pins and tape, it wouldn't survive a full routine. And Madison knew that. I had packed an emergency sewing kit, extra tights, spare shoes, but not a second dress. Because I had assumed, naively, that the only thing we needed to prepare for was chance, not intention. Back in the dressing room, Heather was in performance mode. She offered tissues to the other moms, complimented hairstyles, filled water bottles. All with that same smile, the one that never reached her eyes, the one that seemed pasted on as though she wore it out of obligation, like a badge of her role as the nice sister-in-law. She had claimed the best corner of the room, space for herself and the twins, a table for their accessories, a rolling rack they hadn't brought but now insisted had been mistakenly delivered. No one corrected her. When we returned, I caught her watching us from across the room. That smile flickered just for a moment when she saw Madison's tearless face. She tilted her head, stepped forward, and said loudly enough for others to hear, "Oh, you're back. I hope the air helped. You know, if you need to withdraw, no one will judge. There's always next year." I didn't answer. Madison didn't either. We simply walked past her and gathered our things. A few parents offered sympathetic glances, but no one stepped in. This was family business, and everyone sensed the unspoken rule, don't interfere. I crouched beside my daughter and gently fixed a loose pin in her hair. My hands trembled slightly. "Sweetheart," I whispered, "we still have time. If there's anything else you packed, anything we can make work." She reached for her water bottle, took a slow sip, and said, "There's something I need to show you, but not here." I followed her without hesitation as she led me down a quiet corridor toward the back of the venue. We passed closed classrooms and a row of coat racks until she stopped in front of a locker. Not ours, not assigned. She turned the dial on the combination lock with calm precision. "How do you know the code?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She opened the door and pulled out a garment bag I had never seen. Inside, hanging neatly on the hook, was a second costume. Purple. Silver accents. Same silhouette. Different energy. "Where did this come from?" I asked, unable to hide my surprise. Madison looked at me, not like a child asking permission, but like someone letting me into a plan that had been in motion long before I noticed. "It's the backup. I didn't tell you because, well, I wasn't sure you'd believe it was necessary, but Sophia did. And so did I." It struck me then that she had not been blindsided. She had been preparing, quietly, intelligently. While I was trying to preserve civility, she had been safeguarding her future. Heather had made one critical error. She assumed Madison was like me, but she wasn't. The garment bag was labeled only with a small silver sticker, MM23, barely noticeable against the canvas. Inside, the dress shimmered in muted purple under the hallway lights, its silver embroidery catching each glint with deliberate restraint. It was not flamboyant. It was intentional, built for movement, not spectacle, the kind of design that reveals itself in motion, not on a hanger. Madison stood silently beside me as I examined it. The stitching was clean, the seams reinforced, the fabric layered just enough to flow but never billow. I recognized the handiwork. It was from the same designer we had commissioned for the teal dress. But I had not ordered this. "When did you do this?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand. "About 6 weeks ago," she replied, "after the spring showcase, when Heather accidentally swapped my shoes before warm-up." I remembered that incident. Madison had gone on stage in a slightly smaller pair. Her movements had been tight that day, her footwork more cautious than usual. I had chalked it up to nerves. Now, in hindsight, it was part of a pattern. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked at me with something between kindness and clarity. Because you would have confronted her, and then she would have done something different, something we couldn't fix. Her logic was painful, not because it was wrong, but because it was right. Sophia's name came up again, naturally. She helped me pick the color. She said the purple would carry better under stage lights, and she knew it would complement the revised choreography. I blinked. You changed the routine too? Just small adjustments. Pacing. Turn sequences. Stuff that works better with the new hemline. Sophia called it contingency choreography. There was no bitterness in her tone, no gloating, just calm precision. I helped her unzip the bag fully and lift the dress off the hanger. It was light in my hands, almost insubstantial, but I could feel the weight of preparation stitched into every fold. Madison stepped into it without ceremony, the way a dancer returns to the floor after a fall, without explanation, without excuse. Once zipped, the transformation was quiet, but complete. She didn't look like a child salvaging a ruined morning. She looked like someone arriving exactly as she meant to. We should still warm up, I said, mostly to fill the space between us, even if you've already practiced in this. She nodded. Let's use the rehearsal room in the West Wing. Fewer people go there. We walked in silence. The venue buzzed behind us, mothers unzipping makeup kits, girls marking steps in hallways, volunteers calling names from clipboards. But we moved through it like ghosts. Unbothered, untouched. Inside the practice room, Madison moved to the center and began her sequence without waiting for music. I sat near the wall, watching her body translate intention into line. The skirt followed her like breath, framing her turns, amplifying her leaps. This dress didn't replace the original. It revealed something the teal never could. When she landed her final pose and turned to me, I was already wiping my eyes. It works, I said simply. I know, she replied. There was no panic left in her voice, no doubt, just focus. I had always thought of preparation as protection, as the act of guarding against disaster. But watching her now, I saw it differently. Preparation wasn't about fear. It was about control. Not in the way Heather tried to control things through interference, intimidation, sabotage, but through readiness. Quiet readiness. She's going to ask, I said finally, standing. Heather, when she sees you on stage, she's going to want to know where the dress came from. Madison gave a small shrug. Let her wonder. We walked back into the dressing room just as the last call for Madison's division echoed overhead. A gentle wave of panic seemed to ripple through the other parents, checking lipstick, adjusting straps, smoothing flyaway hairs. But we moved slowly, deliberately. Madison still wore her warm-up jacket zipped to the collar, her legs covered in loose rehearsal pants. Heather's head snapped up the moment we entered. Her eyes flicked to the garment bags in my hand, one real, one damaged, and then back to Madison's face. I saw the micro-expressions ripple across her face, relief, satisfaction, then veiled concern when she noticed my posture. I held the bag with the torn teal dress a little higher than the other. I made sure it looked heavy, fragile, something worth pitying. Were you able to fix it? Heather asked, her voice syrupy, overly careful. We're going to try, I said. Not a lie, but not the truth either. My tone was flat, unrevealing. Heather nodded with mock sympathy. Sometimes it's about the experience, not the result. Right, girls? She added, turning to her twins who were already in costume, stretching in front of the mirror. They didn't answer. Madison sat quietly in the corner and began adjusting the straps on her shoes. She kept her face neutral, her movements unhurried. She didn't flinch when Heather leaned over and added, Well, even if you're marked down, it's still good practice. Judges are trained to spot potential, not just polish. Heather believed she had won. She believed we would walk Madison onto that stage in a mangled teal dress held together with safety pins and tape. She believed the sabotage had worked. I let her believe. We timed everything carefully. Madison would not change into her performance shoes until the last possible moment. She would not unzip her jacket. We would not draw attention. The trick wasn't to surprise Heather. It was to let her feel safe. Certain. Triumphant. There was a knock on the door, followed by a volunteer's voice. Dancers in Division A, please proceed to the staging hallway. 5 minutes. I turned to Madison. Ready? She looked up at me. Always. We moved through the backstage corridors in silence. The lighting was dimmer here, the sounds more muffled. The twins were already lining up behind the black curtains, their mother fussing with the fall of a hemline that needed no fixing. She barely acknowledged us. Madison found a quiet corner behind a folding screen, ducked behind it, and I passed her the proper shoes and a small bag with the essentials. I stood as lookout, not because anyone might stop her, but because this transformation didn't need an audience. When she stepped back out, I had to suppress a gasp. The purple dress glowed under the harsh backstage lights. Her hair was intact, her face composed. She had entered the morning as a child, hoping to be seen. Now she was someone else entirely. Heather hadn't noticed yet. She was still instructing her daughters to keep their toes pointed and expressions lifted. She spoke with the urgency of someone who needed to micromanage Grace. She didn't see what was coming, not until Madison's name was called. Madison Mitchell, number 216, please step forward. We walked together to the wings. I gave her a final squeeze on the hand. Dance like no one can take it away from you. She smiled, the smallest hint of mischief in her expression. As she stepped out into the light, I turned, just in time to see Heather finally look up. Her reaction was subtle. A quick inhale, a shift in her stance. The narrowing of her eyes as she took in the color, the cut, the movement of fabric she hadn't planned for. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply watched for the first time all day without control. And Madison hadn't even danced yet. When the music began, it started soft, barely audible at first. A low hum that rose like breath catching in the chest. Madison took her place center stage, one arm extended as if she were reaching for something just out of view. She moved slowly at first, each step calculated, yet free of tension. There was no fear in her limbs, no hesitation in her line. And then she danced. It was not the version we had watched 100 times in rehearsal. This one breathed differently. It carried weight where we had once expected lightness, pause where we had anticipated flow. The adjustments they had made for the purple dress had become something else entirely, not compromises, but enhancements. The choreography had not been rewritten. It had evolved. From my place in the wings, I saw it unfold like memory. Each turn pulled from the floor with elegant force, each leap landing like punctuation. There were no breaks, no tells. The movements told their own story of effort, of fear, of something taken and something reclaimed. The judges leaned in. One of them began writing notes early, then stopped altogether, eyes fixed. Another tilted her head slightly, as if searching for the deeper rhythm beneath the movement. They weren't just watching technique. They were watching intention. It wasn't the dress. It wasn't even the routine. It was Madison's composure, her restraint, her clarity. The story she told with her body wasn't about betrayal. It was about transcendence. She didn't need to point fingers. Her performance was the answer. Behind me, I could feel the shift in the room. Other parents had gathered quietly near the wings. A few dancers waiting their turn had paused to watch. Even Heather, standing just feet away, had frozen mid-comment. She wasn't watching as a competitor now. She was watching as someone who knew what she had tried to take and realized it hadn't been enough. Because Madison wasn't just executing steps, she was inhabiting them. The final sequence came like exhale. 5 pirouettes, flawless and centered, spun out like silk. Then a suspended arabesque, lifted into the closing notes. When the music stopped, she held the pose for a breath and a half before lowering her arms with control that defied her age. Then the room erupted. Applause surged before the announcer even stepped forward. Someone in the back shouted, "Bravo!" though the crowd quieted as quickly as it had risen. It wasn't a performance that needed noise. It asked for stillness afterward, because no one wanted to forget how it felt. Madison bowed, a graceful, quiet thank you, and walked off stage as if she had simply done what she came to do. She returned to me in the wings with flushed cheeks and calm breath. "Did I do okay?" she asked. I laughed softly. "You didn't dance. You told a truth that needed no explanation." Sophia met us backstage moments later. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes shining. "That wasn't just your best performance," she said, placing both hands on Madison's shoulders. "That was your signature." We returned to the dressing room, where conversation stopped when we walked in. Parents offered subdued nods. Some of the dancers clapped quietly. The twins looked up, neither embarrassed nor resentful. Just quiet. Heather stood by the mirror, one hand frozen mid-adjustment on Amber's sleeve. Her eyes tracked Madison's every step. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. After Madison's performance, the room didn't return to normal. Not entirely. The other girls resumed warming up, their parents resumed small talk, but something hung in the air. An undercurrent of silence that followed us as we sat down. The applause still echoed somewhere in my bones, but I could feel the discomfort too. Not toward Madison, toward Heather. She didn't say a word. She watched Madison unzip her warm-up jacket and carefully hang it on the rack. She watched her take slow sips of water and gently loosen her hair from the competition bun. She watched as Sophia came back to check on her, still beaming, still quiet. Then, finally, Heather moved. She stepped out of the dressing room with a sharpness to her heels that didn't match her words. "Back in a minute," she said to no one. A few heads turned as the door clicked shut behind her. I didn't need to ask where she was going. By the time the award ceremony began an hour later, Madison was changed into her street clothes. Her cheeks were still lightly flushed, but there was no visible tension in her posture. We stood together at the back of the auditorium as names were called. Honorable mentions, 3rd place, 2nd. Madison squeezed my hand, but her grip was steady. Then, 1st place in the junior contemporary division, Madison Mitchell, with special recognition for artistic expression. I felt her shoulders lift, not in surprise, but in quiet relief. She walked to the front with poise, accepted the trophy and certificate with a graceful nod. There were cheers, whistles. The Garcia family stood. Even the twins clapped. But the moment that followed, the one I hadn't expected, came when the competition director leaned down and said something to Madison before shaking her hand. She returned to me, beaming. "They want me to consider the summer intensive. A scout saw my performance." The words came like sunlight through fog. We were still letting it sink in when I saw Heather reappear, this time not from the audience, but from the side hallway, trailing the director. She was gesturing, voice raised just enough for me to catch fragments. Not the costume registered, changed her look at the last minute. Judges were misled. My breath caught. I moved forward slowly, not to intervene, but to hear. The director held a clipboard, listening without interrupting. His face was unreadable. When Heather paused, clearly waiting for agreement, he spoke with measured calm. "Mrs. Bennett, he said. "The rules permit a costume change in case of damage or malfunction. The stage manager approved it and the judges were informed backstage. There's no violation." "But the other dancers," she began, flustered. "They didn't get to change." She had an unfair advantage. The color, the sparkle, the judges do not score based on fabric color, he replied evenly. They score based on technique, musicality, and artistic expression. If you have a formal complaint, you're welcome to submit it in writing. Heather opened her mouth, closed it. Her hands clenched into tight fists by her sides. She looked past him, to Madison, who was standing near the stairs, chatting softly with Sophia and Isabella. Then she turned and walked out. Not another word, not a glance at her daughters, not even to Kevin, who had arrived halfway through and now stood near the back, arms folded across his chest. Later, he would come to us, embarrassed, apologetic. He would say he didn't know what she had done, not really, that he'd only just heard from Ashley, that he was sorry. But in that moment, as Heather left the room with the protest still lodged in her throat, what stayed with me wasn't her anger, it was her silence. She had tried to control the story, but the story no longer needed her voice. The ceremony ended without her. Heather never returned to the auditorium. By the time the trophies were handed out, she had already disappeared, slipping out with her daughters before the applause began. There was no explanation, no final comment, no dramatic exit. Only absence. Kevin stood at the edge of the crowd, his face still, his eyes unsettled. He didn't say much, just watched as Madison took the stage in her street clothes, received her award with quiet poise, and returned to her seat without gloating. It wasn't a moment about triumph. It was about grace. Afterward, while the judges shook hands and the chairs were being folded up, Kevin approached, slow and hesitant. I could tell he'd heard enough to understand what had happened. Maybe not every detail, but enough to feel the weight of it. His expression was the kind a brother wears when he wants to apologize for something he didn't do himself, but maybe should have stopped. He didn't make excuses. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there for a moment, then left. That night, our celebration was quiet. Madison wanted her favorite meal and nothing more. At the restaurant, she sat between Ryan and me, twirling pasta slowly, resting her head on my shoulder without saying much. There were no long speeches, no reliving of what had gone wrong. She didn't ask why Heather had done it. She didn't need to. Some truths arrive without a conclusion. In the days that followed, there were no texts from Heather, no phone calls, no justifications. Instead, a message came from her daughter. It was brief. A question about an upcoming birthday party. Nothing accusatory, nothing defensive, just a small request that carried a quiet hope. That was the beginning of the shift. Not dramatic, not loud. Just subtle moments where Heather's presence began to dissolve. She didn't insert herself into family plans anymore. She didn't offer advice. She didn't comment on anyone's choices. And when she was present, she said little. Not because she had changed, but because she had lost the space to speak without consequence. The silence that came afterward wasn't a punishment. It was a vacuum she had created by pushing too far, one sabotage too many. The same family who once tolerated her dominance now paused before including her in decisions. Even Kevin seemed to carry a different air around her, less deferential, more weary. Eventually, he reached out. We met in a neutral place, and he told me what I already sensed, that Heather had agreed to see someone, that she was being urged gently but firmly to examine the pattern. How every disappointment turned into competition. How every challenge became a threat. He spoke as if untangling a long knot, one that had been tightening over years. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't defend what she'd done. He just wanted to understand it. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was distance, and from that distance came clarity. Heather hadn't just lost a competition. She had lost her script. The role she had written for herself, protector of talent, mother of the winning daughters, keeper of control, had unraveled. No one had taken it from her. She had dropped it in her own hands, and in its place we were learning how to speak again, without her voice overshadowing ours. It came folded inside a card with glitter on the edges, a hand-drawn cake on the front. Inside, 2 names were written in blue ink: Amber and Ashley. Below them, a line added in careful cursive: "We hope Madison can come." There was no mention of Heather, no signature from her hand, just the invitation, tucked in our mailbox on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, as if the weeks since the competition hadn't reshaped everything. Madison opened it without ceremony. She read it twice, then set it on the counter beside her juice glass and went back to tying her point shoes. She didn't ask if she could go. She didn't say she wouldn't. She simply let it sit there, silent and unpressured. A question that answered itself. I left it untouched for days. There had been no apology, no conversation. Heather hadn't explained. But that absence, strangely, had become the only explanation we needed. She didn't speak because there was nothing safe left for her to say, and yet the twins still reached out. Through text messages, through dance questions, through small, quiet gestures that seemed to come from a place untouched by their mother's expectations. They had seen something on that stage that day, not just Madison's costume or her choreography, but her calm, her choice to perform in spite of everything. It changed something in them. At the studio, Sophia noticed the shift too. The twins had begun arriving early, staying later, asking for extra help not to outshine someone else, but to improve in ways that felt personal. They started smiling more, hesitantly at first, then with the kind of ease that doesn't require permission. It wasn't rebellion. It was relief. When the day of the party arrived, I watched Madison pack a small gift bag herself. She chose a pair of hair ties and a charm necklace she had made with glass beads. Nothing expensive, nothing loud, just something thoughtful, held together with care. She didn't wear a costume or anything polished, just jeans, a soft sweater, and her hair in a loose braid. She didn't ask me to come. She didn't need company, only trust. I dropped her off at Kevin's house. The yard was dotted with balloons in lavender and gold. I saw Ashley waiting at the door, her shoulders visibly relaxing when Madison stepped out of the car. They disappeared inside without looking back. I stayed parked for a minute longer, then drove away without calling anyone inside. That night, when I picked her up, Madison had frosting on her sleeves and a small, amused smile on her lips. She didn't talk about Heather. She didn't mention what was said or unsaid. She just said the cake was good and the music was loud, and that she and Ashley had practiced turns in socks on the hardwood floor until they both slipped and laughed. It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't even peace. But it was a moment that didn't require Heather's approval or explanation. It belonged to the girls, untouched by the legacy of control. Later that week, I found a message from Kevin waiting in my inbox. It was short, just a thank you for giving the twins a chance to step forward, even if their mother still stood in place. He said therapy was continuing, slow but consistent. That Heather hadn't changed overnight. But something in their home had softened. I didn't reply immediately. There was nothing urgent to say. I read the message, then closed it. I walked to the living room and found Madison on the floor, stretching beside the stereo. A new routine played quietly in the background. She moved gently, almost lazily. No stage lights, no deadlines. Just movement for its own sake. I sat nearby, and for the first time in a long time, the air in our home felt still, not heavy with avoidance, not tight with anticipation, just still. And enough. The acceptance letter came in a plain envelope. No ribbons, no bold print, no fanfare. Just a simple crest at the top, the name of the academy in embossed silver, and the words, "We are pleased to invite Madison Mitchell to join our junior associate program for the upcoming term." She read it twice, then folded it back along the crease and laid it flat on the dining table, as if it might still vanish if she looked too long. It hadn't been expected. Not really. There had been whispers, yes. Sophia had mentioned a scout attending the competition, someone who had taken notes, stayed seated long after Madison's final pose. But we didn't talk about it. We had learned not to speak dreams out loud until they had roots. This one had rooted itself quietly. No one from the academy called Heather. No one needed Kevin's approval. It wasn't discussed in family chats. The news moved differently through emails, private congratulations, a meeting with Sophia that ended with her saying, "You're ready for this, Madison," whether anyone else understands or not. The program required travel. Not far, but far enough to feel it. Saturday intensives, summer residencies, weeks away from home with dancers just as skilled, just as hungry. It was a door into a different world, and she was already halfway through it. Heather never mentioned the program. Not in passing, not in comment. Whether she heard about it from the twins or Kevin, we never knew. What we did know was that she stopped attending the smaller competitions. She sent the twins with Kevin or with a friend. Her absence no longer left a hole, it left space. Space for different kinds of conversations. For the twins to ask about stretches without worry. For Kevin to offer help without over-explaining. For Sophia to talk about the future without glancing sideways for approval. In that space, Madison began preparing. Quietly, without spectacle. She studied old choreography reels. Practiced with Sophia until the studio lights dimmed. She taped new floor patterns in our living room and measured her own corrections with slow, deliberate patience. We didn't celebrate with balloons. We didn't throw a party. We hung her acceptance letter on the fridge beside a grocery list and a reminder to replace the light bulb in the hallway. Life didn't pause for achievement. It adjusted around it. And still, the letter stayed there. Not as proof, but as a marker. At dinner one night, Madison asked if I'd be okay while she was away. It was the kind of question I hadn't expected from a 12-year-old. Not framed in that way. She wasn't asking for permission. She was offering reassurance that I wouldn't be alone. That she knew what this meant, for me, as much as for her. I said I'd miss her, but that I wanted her to see what she was capable of, beyond what we could give her at home. She nodded, and that was the end of it. The week before she left, the twins stopped by the studio. No announcement, no Heather. They came with a small card and a travel-sized sewing kit wrapped in purple paper. Inside the card were only 3 words, written in alternating handwriting. Just in case. Madison smiled, not as a victor, but as someone who understood what it meant to walk away carrying only what you earned. She placed the sewing kit in the side pocket of her new duffel bag, between her dance shoes and a carefully folded backup dress. Not out of fear, not in expectation, just preparation. And for the first time in months, we all slept soundly that night. She didn't cry when we dropped her off. The academy campus was tucked behind old oak trees, the kind that filtered light in soft gold bands across the courtyard. Other students had already arrived, duffel bags in hand, some dragging suitcases, others clasping worn teddy bears or oversized water bottles. Madison carried her bag on one shoulder. The purple dress hung in a garment bag on the other, just in case. I watched her check in at the table under the white canopy, exchange a few words with the staff, then look back toward me with a nod. not for permission, but as a quiet signal that she knew where she was going next. We unpacked in her assigned dorm room, the space small but clean, the kind of place where growth happens quietly. She arranged her shoes under the bed, folded her sweaters, clipped her schedule to the bulletin board. I watched as she smoothed the edges of her pillowcase, unhurried, like she had all the time in the world. When I asked if she needed anything else, she said, "No, Mom, I'm all set." She didn't ask me to stay. She didn't rush me out. We stood for a moment near the door, sunlight catching the edge of her water bottle. I kissed her forehead, and she hugged me, carefully, so as not to wrinkle her practice clothes. And then I left. I didn't look back. Neither did she. On the drive home, the silence felt different. Not heavy like before, not hollow, just full of everything she had become. Heather didn't call that day. She didn't text congratulations. She didn't ask for updates, and I didn't offer any. There had been enough said already. We no longer needed to involve her in the milestones she tried to sabotage. The truth had taken its place, quietly, steadily. In the way the twins now asked for advice directly. In the way Kevin showed up alone to recitals, holding a phone but never recording for someone else. In the way Madison had outgrown, needing permission to grow. At home, I folded her laundry, just the few things she hadn't brought with her. On her nightstand sat the broken zipper pull from the teal dress, the one I hadn't had the heart to throw away. Next to it, the invitation card from the twins. And a photo of Sophia and Madison, arms around each other after her performance, their smiles tilted slightly toward the same future. Each item told a version of the story we had lived through. But none of them needed explaining anymore. 2 weeks into the program, Madison sent me a video. Just 30 seconds. A small piece of choreography she had learned that day, fluid, precise, full of breath. She didn't say anything in the message, just sent the clip and added a single word. Today. I watched it twice. Then again. She was still her, but more. In the final frames, she spun once, landed clean and looked off camera, focused, composed. There was no one clapping, no one watching. Just her, the floor beneath her, the music around her. No audience, no approval needed, just purpose. And it was more than enough.